Well, as officials in Atlanta investigate the police shooting of 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks, his family is calling for charges against the officers who were involved in it. The officer who authorities say fired 3 shots at him and killed Brooks, former officer Garrett Rolfe, he has been fired. Could the next step be criminal charges? Let's bring in our legal panel, trial lawyer, immigration attorney Rachel Self, and defense attorney and former prosecutor Robert Schlack. Welcome to you both. Robert, let me start with you. Do you think that Rolfe will be charged, indicted, and what could he face?
Well, Eric, in Georgia, unlike most states, there's only one level of murder. There are no degrees in the state of Georgia. So the state would have to believe that he either acted intentionally, that it was a felony murder, like you saw in the George Floyd officer arrest, or that this was depraved indifference. I believe the only charge they could seek under the murder would be intentional, but I don't know whether or not the video support it. Obviously, there's a lot of evidence that hasn't come out. They could also go with a manslaughter charge. If I'm the district attorney, I would impanel a grand jury immediately. I would notify the officer, and I would allow everyone to call witnesses so that it can be done expeditiously, fairly, and so that all of the evidence can come out in the appropriate manner as opposed to just lodging charges.
Rachel, I mean, we saw on the video what we could see at least. I mean, he turns, has the taser. First, there's a violent struggle. He resists arrests. He does not comply with the legal authority of the police officers. But then he turns with this taser. Some people say, well, it's a deadly weapon. Other people say, no, it's not. It's not a gun, that the officer should not have had a service revolver out, and there's no reason for this killing.
There absolutely is no reason for this murder, Eric. The murder of Mr. Brooks happened after police responded to a call for somebody sleeping in their car. Not a crime, not a violent act, nothing like that. And police responded, and they proceeded to, for 25 minutes, have a peaceable interaction with Mr. Brooks that they then proceeded to escalate. Mr. Brooks offered to let his car be impounded, to walk home. They had his name. They knew where he lived. They had the license plate of his car. There were so many choices that could have been made here by these officers rather than escalating the situation to the point where then, yes, Mr. Brooks was taken to the ground by the officers, and there was a struggle, and he did hit the officers, and he did try to flee. But the officers becoming judge, jury, and executioner when they responded to a peaceable call for a man sleeping in his car, there's a reason we have charges like resisting arrest or assault and battery on a police officer or fugitive from justice. We have those charges so that a person could be charged if they actually commit those crimes.
But Rachel, you say, let me interrupt you for a second. You say the police escalated it. That's not apparent at all in that video. It shows that they did have 20 minutes. He was very polite. Let me finish. He was very polite, called the police officers sir, and that it was Mr. Brooks who escalated it by suddenly dropping down and resisting arrest and throwing punches, it seems. That the police were acting in a very professional manner, Rachel, it seems.
So I actually would disagree with that, Eric. And as Bob pointed out, there is a lot of various evidence in this case. But what we've seen so far is there are over 25 minutes of various cell phone videos, various things. And what we've seen is, yes, he did struggle. Absolutely, he did. But we need to remember, if we're going to consider the objective intent of the officers at a time when something's going on, in his mind, Eric, in this world today, if you are a black man and you are taken to the ground by officers, it certainly is reasonable for you to perhaps have some fear in you and perhaps struggle. So I don't see that what he did, while I don't agree that he made all the right choices that day, he absolutely did not deserve to be gunned down as he was running away from officers.
And finally, Robert, what's your view on the escalation and the fact that, you know, as citizens, what type of responsibility do we have? Sadly, if he complied, he would have been taken to booking probably, and, you know, would have been out, and it would have been maybe a DUI charge at worst.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think Rachel's forgetting the fact that she's acting as if he was in the parking lot merely sleeping. He was blocking traffic. Cars were going around him. If he drove there in an intoxicated state, he failed the preliminary breath test. They were doing their duty. I have both prosecuted.
Wait a minute, Rachel.
I've prosecuted and defended people charged with this exact thing, where they're in the drive-thru at a fast food restaurant and they pass out for whatever reason. If the key's in the ignition, the engine is running, and they're doing, as Eric pointed out, they were cordial, and the minute they went to place him in custody, they weren't becoming violent. He literally took them to the ground, threw punches, took a taser. Now, I agree. The bullet shots should have never happened as an individual's running away. That's police officer 101. But to act as if these officers went there with some intent on harming him, killing him, or etc., it's just not, the video doesn't support that.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not all what I've said. But what I'm saying is a police officer's job when they respond to a scene is to de-escalate the situation, not escalate the situation. And there were several options available to these officers other than arresting this gentleman at that moment. There were several other available options.
You can't say an officer should just have, in this environment, not be permitted to effectuate a lawful arrest. That's his or her job, and that's exactly what they do.
In this environment, an officer should take extra special caution to try to de-escalate a situation.
Well, what would you have done, Rachel? I mean, if he apparently was over the legal limit, according to the police, would you say, well, just go home and we'll drive you home?
No, well, that's what they would have done in the olden days, Eric. How many people remember in the olden times keys left in a tailpipe by the officer who let the person just go home? This is the point. None of this was violent. It absolutely shouldn't have erupted and ended in this man being killed. And the fact that he ran away, it's not right that he ran away, but the officer shouldn't have chosen shooting him as a solution to him running away. And so here's what I've suggested in this climate.
We're going to have to go because they're up against the clock. Robert, last word. Briefly.
Yeah, I agree with Rachel to that capacity. If he was running away at that point, they had his car, they had his registration, they knew where he lived, and they knew what he looked like. He's on video. The one thing I'll say, though, is when a police officer has someone turn to them with a taser who had just taken them to the ground, swung at punch, tried to tase them, we can't get into their mind in that split second. Is this guy going to tase me, come back for my gun, and shoot me? We can't put ourselves in that split-second decision. It is an impossibility, and it's going to be very difficult for any jury, should charges be lodged, to say that he didn't fear for his life at that point.
Yeah, the police union, as I pointed out, said that police procedure was properly followed. We will see what the prosecutors do. Rachel and Robert, thank you for weighing.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, Eric.